Have you ever imagined a 10-year-old boy leaving a millionaire businessman completely speechless? Keep watching to discover how Daniel Roberts, the gardener's son, amazed everyone by speaking 5 languages fluently. Daniel Roberts adjusted his school backpack and followed his father through the imposing gates of the Smith mansion. At just 10 years old, he was a black boy with bright eyes and insatiable curiosity who accompanied his father, John, to work every afternoon after attending public school in their neighborhood. To him, that 3-story mansion in Beverly Hills felt like a fairy tale castle, a world completely different from his humble reality. John Roberts had worked as a gardener for the Smith family for 8 years. He was an honest, hard-working man who woke before the sun to tend to the extensive gardens of the property. With his calloused hands and deep knowledge of plants, he had transformed the mansion's grounds into a true green paradise. But for Dr. Alexander Smith, John was just another useful employee, discreet and, most importantly, invisible. "Daniel, you stay here in the garden while I finish pruning the rose bushes," John said affectionately, pointing to a marble bench under the shade of an old oak tree. "Don't wander off and don't bother anyone, okay?" "Okay, Dad," Daniel replied, already familiar with the routine. He would sit on that bench, do his homework, and when no one was looking, he would fascinatedly observe the sophisticated world unfolding around him through the mansion's glass windows. Dr. Alexander Smith emerged from his black BMW, speaking loudly on his cell phone in English about business mergers and multi-million-dollar contracts. At 50, he was an imposing man, always wearing expensive Italian suits and emanating an aura of superiority that made everyone around him feel small. His business involved import and export to various countries, which required constant communication with international partners. "John," he shouted quickly when he saw the gardener, "the orchids in the entrance hall are wilting. I have an important meeting tomorrow and I can't receive clients seeing dead plants." "Yes, Dr. Smith, I'll take care of it immediately," John replied humbly, bowing his head. Daniel watched the interaction with keen attention. He had long noticed how Dr. Smith treated his father, not like a person, but like a tool. He never asked about John's family, never showed genuine interest in his life. To Alexander, people like them were part of the landscape, necessary but irrelevant. What Dr. Alexander didn't know was that Daniel spent his afternoons not just doing homework, but also absorbing everything around him like a sponge. He listened to his phone conversations in different languages through the open windows, observed his gestures when speaking with foreign partners, memorized words and phrases that he later researched on the school's internet. The boy possessed an exceptional photographic memory and a natural aptitude for languages that neither he nor John fully suspected. At home in the evenings, he accessed free language apps on the old cell phone his father had given him, studied YouTube videos, and practiced pronunciation, whispering softly so as not to wake anyone. To Alexander, Daniel was just the gardener's son, a poor black child who accompanied his father to work. He barely greeted him when he passed by, treating him as part of the house's furniture. He never imagined that this invisible boy was becoming a self-taught polyglot, absorbing knowledge that would soon leave him utterly dumbfounded. And have you ever been underestimated because of your appearance or background? If so, comment talent below if you've experienced such a moment. Sometimes the most brilliant people are where we least expect them. Every night after John fell asleep, exhausted from his hard work, Daniel would hide in the small bathroom of their house and turn on his old cell phone in silent mode. With makeshift headphones made from stripped wires, he would dive into a world of languages he had discovered by chance 3 years earlier when he overheard Dr. Alexander speaking English with an American client. "Hello, my name is Daniel," he would whisper softly, imitating the perfect pronunciation he had memorized from online videos. "Bonjour, je m'appelle Daniel. Hola, me llamo Daniel. Guten Tag, ich bin Daniel. Ciao, mi chiamo Daniel." His study routine was meticulous and self-taught. During mornings at public school, Daniel paid maximum attention in French classes to understand grammatical structure. Then he applied these concepts to the languages he studied alone. In the afternoons, while his father took care of the mansion's gardens, he would quickly finish his homework and then dedicate himself to what truly fascinated him, deciphering the mysteries of foreign languages. The Smith Mansion's library became his secret university. When Dr. Alexander traveled and the house was empty, except for the housekeeper, Miss Carmen, Daniel would ask permission to use the bathroom and end up getting lost in the corridors. Miss Carmen, a kind lady who had always been gentle with him, would turn a blind eye when she found him reading books in English or French. "This boy is different," Miss Carmen would murmur to herself. "He has a hunger for knowledge I've never seen." Daniel had discovered that Dr. Alexander owned dictionaries and grammars in 5 different languages. He would photograph entire pages with his cell phone and then study them at home, creating his own learning method. He memorized 50 new words a day, practiced verb conjugations using songs he found online, and developed a unique association technique that allowed him to perfectly recall complex grammatical structures. What was most impressive was his ability to absorb accents and intonations. Daniel not only learned the words, but grasped the cultural nuances of each language. He knew that American English was different from British, that Parisian French had distinct peculiarities from Canadian French, and that Spanish varied drastically between countries. John would occasionally hear him murmuring strange words while doing homework, but he attributed it to his son's vivid imagination. "Daniel has always been a dreamer," he would think tenderly, never suspecting that his 10-year-old son mastered linguistic concepts that university students took years to assimilate. In the afternoons at the mansion, Daniel developed a mental game. He simultaneously translated everything Dr. Alexander said on the phone. When he spoke in English about business with the United States, he mentally converted it to French. When he spoke in Spanish with Mexican partners, he followed every word and then practiced the phrases alone. Dr. Alexander, completely oblivious to the prodigy developing under his nose, continued to treat Daniel as human furniture. To him, he was just a poor black child who didn't deserve attention. His important phone conversations took place in Daniel's presence without any concern, as he was convinced that a boy of that background could never comprehend sophisticated business discussions. This arrogance and prejudice blindness of Alexander's was about to be shattered in the most unexpected way possible. Daniel was not just an observant child, he had become a phenomenal polyglot, ready to surprise the world in a way no one would ever imagine. Tuesday began like any other day at the Smith Mansion. Dr. Alexander rushed out in the morning, carrying his Italian leather briefcase and speaking loudly on his cell phone about a crucial meeting with Japanese investors. "I'll be out all day," he shouted to Miss Carmen. "If anyone calls, take a message. I don't want to be disturbed." Daniel arrived with his father at lunchtime, as he always did on Tuesdays and Thursdays when he didn't have afternoon classes at public school. John was especially focused that day, as Dr. Alexander had ordered a complete rearrangement of the front garden to impress the investors who would be visiting the following week. "Dad, can I do my homework in the pool room?" Daniel asked, referring to a covered, airy area at the back of the house where he usually studied when it was very hot. "Yes, my son, but don't make a mess and don't touch anything you shouldn't," John replied, already picking up his tools to begin replanting the imported seedlings he had bought that morning. Daniel settled at the glass table in the pool area with his school notebooks, but his attention was immediately captured by a phone conversation Miss Carmen was having in the kitchen in Spanish with her sister who lived in Texas. Daniel followed every word perfectly, smiling as Miss Carmen told funny stories about her grandchildren. It was almost 2 hours of quiet study when the landline phone in Dr. Alexander's office began ringing insistently. Daniel listened from afar and waited for Miss Carmen to answer, but the housekeeper had gone shopping at the market and John was in the backyard too far away to hear. The phone kept ringing. Daniel looked around, checking if anyone else was in the house. His childlike curiosity, combined with his concern that it might be something important, made him get up from his chair. He had seen Dr. Alexander use that phone many times and knew that they were usually important business calls. "Hello?" he answered hesitantly. Pronto, parla, came the reply from the other end of the line in Italian. Daniel felt his heart race. It was a man with a strong Italian accent, probably one of Dr. Alexander's European partners. He took a deep breath and replied in the most fluent Italian he could manage. Buongiorno, signore. Questa è la residenza del dottor Alexander Smith. Come posso aiutarla? There was a surprised pause on the other end. Oh, parla italiano molto bene. Sono Giuseppe Benedetti, socio d'affari del dottor Alexander. Ha un accento perfetto. Complimenti. Grazie mille, signor Benedetti, Daniel replied, feeling confident. Il dottor Alexander non è a casa in questo momento. Posso prendere un messaggio per lei?
Sì, per favore. Ma prima posso chiederle, lei è il nuovo assistente? Il dottor Alexander non mi aveva detto di aver assunto qualcuno con italiano così eccellente. Daniel hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. In realtà sto solo rispondendo al telefono perché non c'è nessun altro in casa, ma parlo italiano. Giuseppe Benedetti laughed with admiration. Incredibile! E da quanto tempo studia italiano? 3 anni più o meno, Daniel replied, calculating mentally. 3 years and you speak so well? Allow me to test you. Giuseppe switched to English without warning. Can you speak English as well? Yes, of course I can, Daniel replied immediately, adapting to the change without difficulty. I've been studying English for about the same time. This is absolutely remarkable, he exclaimed in English. Young man, you have an extraordinary talent. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking? Daniel smiled, feeling proud for the first time of his secret ability. I'm 10 years old, sir. The silence on the other end of the line was complete. What an incredible situation, right? Have you ever done something out of curiosity that changed everything? Comment curiosity below if you've experienced such a moment. Giuseppe Benedetti needed a few seconds to process what he had just heard. A 10-year-old boy conversing fluently in Italian and English with perfect pronunciation and grammatical structure? It was something that defied his 40 years of experience negotiating with international partners. 10 years old? He repeated in Italian, testing if Daniel could keep up with the language switch again. And do you really speak these languages, or are you just repeating memorized phrases? Signor Giuseppe, Daniel replied naturally, posso assicurarle che capisco pienamente quello che stiamo discutendo. Ho studiato la grammatica, la sintassi e anche le sfumature culturali di ogni lingua. Giuseppe fell silent for a moment, impressed not only by the fluency, but also by the sophisticated vocabulary Daniel was using. Words like sfumature, nuances, e sintassi, syntax, were not basic knowledge, they were advanced linguistic concepts. Permettimi di provare con un'altra lingua, he said, deciding to test further. Sprechen Sie auch Deutsch? Ja, natürlich spreche ich Deutsch, Daniel replied immediately in clear and precise German pronunciation. Ich habe Deutsch durch Online-Videos und Grammatikbücher gelernt. Es ist eine sehr logische Sprache, finde ich. Giuseppe almost fainted. Daniel was answering in German, but he was making analytical comments about the language's structure, observing that it was logical compared to other Latin languages. This is truly unbelievable, he murmured. Let's try French. Parlez-vous français aussi, mademoiselle? Bien sûr, monsieur, Daniel replied fluently in French. Le français est ma langue préférée avec l'italien. J'adore la façon dont les mots coulent comme de la musique. My God, Giuseppe whispered. And Spanish? Por supuesto que hablo español, Daniel laughed. Es probablemente el más fácil para mí, porque es similar al francese, que es mi idioma nativo. Giuseppe Benedetti, a man who spoke 6 languages and had spent his entire life impressing people with his linguistic abilities, was utterly dumbfounded. This 10-year-old boy not only mastered 5 languages, but transitioned between them with a fluidity he had only seen in professional interpreters with decades of experience. Extraordinary boy, he said in English, testing if Daniel would notice that he also spoke his native language. How did you manage to learn all this by yourself?
Internet, books, a lot of practice, and a lot of curiosity. I've always had an easy time memorizing and imitating sounds, and I really like understanding how people from different countries think through the way they speak. And where did you learn about international business? Because I noticed you understand the terms we use. Daniel hesitated, then confessed. I've listened to Dr. Smith's conversations for years. I learned a lot about import, export, international contracts. It's fascinating how each country has its own rules and business customs. Giuseppe was now convinced he had discovered a prodigy. May I ask, do you work for Dr. Smith? Are you his assistant? Not exactly, Daniel replied with typical childlike honesty. My father is the gardener here, and I sometimes come with him. I answered the phone because there was no one else, and I thought it might be important. The silence that followed was laden with surprise. Giuseppe finally understood the situation. This brilliant child was the son of an employee, probably from a humble background, who had developed extraordinary skills on his own. Alexander, he said to himself, has no idea of the treasure he has in his own home. At that exact moment, they heard the sound of a key in the front door lock. Dr. Alexander had returned early from the meeting. Dr. Alexander entered the mansion with heavy footsteps, clearly irritated. The meeting with the Japanese investors had been postponed at the last minute, and he was furious at having wasted the entire morning in traffic for nothing. He threw his leather briefcase onto the living room sofa and loosened his tie when he heard a voice speaking in his office. Mr. Giuseppe, I should inform you that Dr. Alexander has just arrived. Would you like to speak with him now, or would you prefer him to return your call later? He listened through the half-open door. Alexander frowned. Who was in his office speaking Italian? He hadn't hired any new assistant, and certainly not someone who spoke fluent Italian. Miss Carmen could barely speak English correctly, let alone Italian. He walked silently to the office door and froze at what he saw. Daniel, the 10-year-old son of the gardener, was sitting in his executive leather armchair, speaking on the phone with professional poise. Dr. Alexander seems to have just arrived, Daniel continued in Italian, completely oblivious to his presence behind him. He can discuss the contract details with the Milan company you mentioned. Alexander felt the world spin. That black boy whom he had always considered just an irrelevant accessory to the gardener was conducting a business conversation in perfect Italian. It was impossible. He must be dreaming. Daniel, he said, his voice louder than he intended. Daniel spun in the chair, eyes wide with fright. Dr. Smith, you're here. He stammered in English, suddenly reverting to childlike shyness. What are you doing in my office? Alexander asked, bewildered and incredulous. Un momento, per favore, Daniel said quickly into the phone, covering the mouthpiece. Dr. Smith, it's Mr. Giuseppe Benedetti from Italy. He called and no one was here to answer, so You speak Italian? Alexander interrupted, still processing the impossible. Yes, sir, I do, Daniel replied softly, as if confessing a crime. Alexander took the phone from his trembling hands. Giuseppe, it's me, Alexander. Alexander, my friend, came the enthusiastic voice of the Italian. You didn't tell me you had a new assistant. This boy is extraordinary. He speaks 5 languages perfectly and understands more about international business than many of my graduate employees. 5 languages? Alexander repeated, looking at Daniel with growing astonishment. Italian, English, German, French, and Spanish. And he's only 10 years old. He's a prodigy, Alexander. You found a rare gem. Alexander slowly hung up the phone, his eyes fixed on Daniel, who now looked like he wanted to disappear under the floor. Do you really speak 5 languages? He asked, his voice full of disbelief. Daniel nodded shyly. Prove it, Alexander said coldly. Speak to me in English. Mr. Smith, Daniel began hesitantly, I'm sorry for answering your phone. I just thought it might be important and there was nobody else here. Alexander felt his legs weaken. The pronunciation was perfect, the American accent impeccable. French, he ordered. Monsieur Smith, je suis vraiment désolé si j'ai fait quelque chose de mal. German. Herr Smith, ich wollte nur helfen. Bitte seien Sie nicht böse auf mich. Alexander sank heavily into the chair beside the desk. In 30 years of international business, he had encountered few adults with the linguistic fluency that this 10-year-old boy was casually demonstrating. How did all this happen, was all he could manage to ask. What a tense moment, right? Have you ever had to prove your talent to someone who doubted you? Comment proof below if you've been through that. The silence in the office was broken only by the ticking of the Swiss clock on the wall. Alexander watched Daniel as if he were seeing an alien. He couldn't reconcile the image of the gardener's simple son with the reality of the polyglot child sitting in front of him. Daniel, he said slowly, how does a 10-year-old boy learn 5 languages fluently? Daniel took a deep breath, realizing it was no use trying to hide his talent anymore. I started listening to you in your phone conversations 3 years ago. I got curious about the different words and started researching online at school. Then I discovered free apps, YouTube videos, and, he hesitated, sometimes I read books from your library when you're not here. My books? Alexander stood up incredulously. You read my German and French grammar books? Yes, sir, I do. And I take notes on my phone to study later at home. Daniel pulled out his old cell phone and showed hundreds of photos of book pages and thousands of notes organized by language. I study 2 hours every night. Alexander took the phone and scrolled through the notes. It was a study method more organized and meticulous than he had seen in many university students. The boy had created his own learning system with conjugation schemes, vocabulary lists by category, and even comparative analyses between languages. At that moment, the phone rang again. Alexander answered automatically. It was Giuseppe again, extremely excited. I couldn't stop thinking about that boy. I need to tell you, he handled our conversation better than some of my sales managers. He has an intuitive understanding of business that is impressive. How is this even possible? Alexander looked at Daniel, who was nervously fidgeting with his hands. Honestly, Giuseppe, I'm asking myself the same thing. He's only 10, but the way he handled everything, I'm speechless. There was a brief silence. Then Giuseppe exhaled slowly, his voice filled with awe. A boy like that, so young, so brilliant, and the son of a gardener. You don't see that every day. A mind like that, in a place no one ever thinks to look. Alexander, my friend, you are missing a rough diamond. This boy is a prodigy. He should be in a special school developing this extraordinary talent. After hanging up, Alexander stared at Daniel for long minutes. For the first time in 50 years of his life, he was being forced to confront his own prejudices brutally. He had spent 3 years treating that child as invisible when he was probably smarter than most of his graduate employees. Daniel, he finally said, would you like to study in a private school? A bilingual one? Daniel's eyes widened. A private school? But that must be very expensive. Let me worry about that. Alexander leaned forward. What if I offered you a job? A job? Daniel almost whispered. As my part-time translation assistant. Weekends, during school holidays. I have many international partners who would love to talk to someone who understands their languages perfectly. At that moment, John entered the office looking for Daniel. He stopped abruptly when he saw the scene, his son casually conversing with the boss, who barely greeted him. Dr. Smith, I'm sorry if my son bothered you. John, Alexander stood up respectfully, treating the gardener as an equal for the first time. Your son is a genius. He speaks 5 languages fluently and has just helped me with an important international negotiation. John's jaw dropped. 5 languages? Daniel? Daniel smiled shyly. Remember when you heard me speaking strange words? I was practicing languages. 6 months later, Daniel was studying at one of the best bilingual schools in Los Angeles, with a full scholarship paid by Alexander. On weekends, he worked as the company's official translator, impressing clients from all over the world. Giuseppe Benedetti became his long-distance mentor, sending him study materials from Italy. Alexander had learned the most important lesson of his life. Talent has no color, social class, or origin. It can flourish in the most unexpected places, just waiting for an opportunity to shine. And sometimes it's a 10-year-old child who teaches us about humility, prejudice, and the true value of people. Daniel, in turn, never forgot his origins. With his first salary, he bought new tools for his father and promised that one day he would open a free language school for children from underprivileged communities. Because true talent is not a privilege. It is a gift that should be shared.
What did you think of this incredible story of overcoming challenges? Leave your comment telling us which moment impressed you the most. Your like is essential so that more people see inspiring stories about talent and overcoming prejudice. Subscribe to the channel to receive our next narratives that show how talent can overcome any barrier, and activate the bell to be notified of all new videos.